Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Home with Olympus Live. Um, Tonight we're going to shake things up a little bit, do it a little different than we normally do. We're going to feature our community feature again tonight, which is our Home with Olympus plus me. So these are some of our favorite photographers that we follow, and we ask them to come on the show and share some of their photos and their tips and tricks. And this year, or this episode, we're talking about the year ahead because it's January, right? We're getting prepared for all the different things that we want to photograph. And so we are going to break this down for you by season. We're going to go winter, spring, summer, and autumn, and have some great tips and inspirational photos to share with you from 4 of our photographers tonight. It's going to be a lot of fun, and I would just like to go ahead and probably jump in tonight and introduce our first photographer. His name is Ethan. Ethan, welcome.
Glad to
Welcome
be
to Home
here.
with Olympus.
Can you all
Nice to
hear me?
meet you.
All right.
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, great. Well, I'm glad
So
to be here.
tell
Go
us
ahead.
where you're from, what kind of photography you like to do.
All right, so I'm from Quincy, Illinois. My main photography that I do is macro photography. I've been doing it for about 4 years with Olympus. Before that, it was just with my iPhone and those little clips that you put on your iPhone. And then I'm like, no, I got to do a little bit better than this. So I about 4 years ago invested in an Olympus camera and the 60 millimeter macro lens, and ever since then I've just been trying to perfect that art and get better and better.
Well, I think you're pretty good and pretty close to perfection with some of your macro work. I'm not gonna lie. So we're happy to have you on here tonight. So you're talking about winter. Ethan is gonna share with us his winter tips. So what are you gonna share with us tonight?
All right, so I'm going to be going over some winter tips. Now I know not all of you live in an area where there's snow, so I'll try and make this as applicable to you and what you can do as possible. If we'll go to our first slide, you'll see here I've got some snowflake pictures. Top left, that snowflake was about 1 millimeter wide. It was a very tiny snowflake, and then you can see on the top right there's a crop of that bottom right corner of that snowflake. So what we're looking at there is probably a field of view of about half of a millimeter or so, maybe even a little bit less than that. Um,
Wow.
and I'm doing this with the Olympus camera. Now, what I'm going to explain to you is the art of focus stacking. Now, a lot of you are probably using the focus stacking that's in your camera. We can talk about that. And we're also going to talk about doing focus bracketing, which is taking more than those 15 images that your camera can stack. At least we're talking about the EM1, Mark II, or 3. And then going past that 15 and stacking in other softwares. So the image that's on your bottom right there, that's another snowflake. I captured that one on glass. So there's going to be 2 things that we're going to be talking about, and that's doing snowflakes on glass, snowflakes on fabric. And I did some crops on there so you could see the type of detail that I'm able to get with this setup. So if we'll go to the next slide here.
Yeah.
The 1 millimeter snowflake that I captured. First of all, a couple tips. First, you need to have your camera and lens cooled off. Maybe leave it in the garage overnight. Not your battery. You want to keep your battery warm so that it doesn't freeze. But you need to get your lenses and stuff to where they don't fog up.
Mm-hmm.
If there's wind, you want to be downwind. The best thing you can do when you're photographing, because people ask me this all the time, why aren't the snowflakes melting? Don't you breathe on them? Doesn't your body heat get to them? And the simple answer is, you need to wear a scarf so that you're breathing through your nose. You need to keep back from your snowflake, but leaving your camera up front. I use constant lighting rather than my flash, so I can work quicker. A lot of times
Does
you
the
have to kind of...
constant light melt your snowflakes though? Does it?
No,
What kind of light do you use?
I'm using a Godox LED. It's got, you can kind of see right there. There we go.
Nice.
And I've got that usually on my hot shoe, and then I'll use, one of those little flex diffusers. You
Nice.
see that? It kind of
Yeah.
goes, in between that and your snowflake. And so I'm usually using that. Sometimes I will hold that above with my hand rather than leaving it on the hot shoe. It just depends on my situation. Um, the snowflake that you can see in that picture, if you can see the little bit of green or yellow that's in it, that's the reflection of my coat that I was wearing that day. I was wearing one of those yellow,
Wow.
worker coats, and so you also have to kind of be careful of your reflection and what lights are around you. But the one thing I would suggest to you guys is if you're doing snowflake photography, a lot of people will get the black felt and that wool that's kind of real stringy. And a lot of times you can't really get the snowflake. The snowflake will wave or move a lot when it's stuck to those fibers. And so I use blue jean fabric or black jeans because the
Yeah.
snowflake then has something a little more steady to set on, and there's not as many fibers that you have to use Photoshop to clone out and deal with. Um, so let's talk about the gear. So this snowflake was captured with my EM1 Mark III, and I used an MC20 teleconverter with my 60 millimeter macro lens. Now, I know a lot of you are thinking, well, I thought the teleconverter was only for use with these pro lenses, these longer pro lenses, and that is the case. That's what Olympus recommends, and that's the only thing that it's made for. However, there is a way to use, and I'll show you here.
Here, let me
Um,
make you. I think I can make you. Yeah, there we
can you
go.
make me bigger? All
Yep,
right.
there we go.
So if you can see here, I've got here a teleconverter, my MC20. You can also use the MC14 for this. And then here I have a Pixco. You can also use Kinko brand. There's a couple different brands that you can use. Extension tube. It's a 16 millimeter, and inside are the electronic connections. What you have to do with the 16 millimeters, you have to like scrape out the inside so that it can fit around that teleconverter lens, which protrudes from the teleconverter, and that allows it to couple with your 60 millimeter macro lens. There we go. That's centered. So if you don't want to whittle away your 16 millimeter and you don't feel comfortable doing that, you can use two 10 millimeter Kinko brand instead of the 116 millimeter, and that will also work to couple those that teleconverter with your 60 millimeter macro lens. You can use Kinko brand or Pixco for that, two 10 millimeter ones. Um, and so, and then on the end of my lens, sorry,
No, that's okay.
I'm sure a lot of you have this. It's called the Raynox 250. It's a very popular macro filter that people use with their lenses, no matter what the brand. And you can get it has a, let me think, it has a 43 millimeter threading on it. So you have to get a coupler to attach that. It just screws right onto the end of your 60 millimeter macro lens. And so, I use that usually, the Raynox 250. Sometimes I'll use the Raynox 202, like I did with this particular snowflake, because it was so small. I needed to get even closer. That creates a little bit of a conflict, or not conflict, but there's a lot of trouble when you're trying to photograph that close up with getting your light perfect. And so that's where I'm usually holding my light above and not having it on my hot shoe. Whereas with the 250, I can usually have it on my hot shoe and I'll be fine. Um, the You can see here in my settings, my focus bracketing mode was at 2 out of 10. There's different settings that you can go to, and I'll explain that here on the next screen. And I focus stacked 125 images for this shot. It was at f4.5. My ISO was at 200. I always use touchscreen release, shutter release, because it allows you to start and stop your camera with the least amount of movement. You can use Olympus capture on your phone to also do it, but you can't start and you can't stop it if something gets messed up with the back of your camera screen. You can just touch it and then touch it again if something messes up and you want to start over. Let's see here. Let's go to the next slide.
There we go.
where's that menu at? So at least on my camera, under the camera with the 2, you go to bracketing, and you want your bracketing to be on, and then you go down to focus bracketing, and you see that that's on. And then where it says focus stacking, you want to turn that off. And that's because you're taking more than the 15 shots needed to get everything in focus. When we're using this Raynox lens on your camera with this MC20 teleconverter, we're talking 4.5x magnification. So where your 60 millimeter macro lens is at 1:1, this is now at 4.5 to 1.
Wow.
So your field of view, let me see here, I got it written down. Your field of view is going to be about 4 millimeters with this. So you're gonna be very close up, and you want to have your focus differential at 2, so that you are taking as many shots as possible and getting everything into focus and then stacking them later.
That's crazy. Is it so? I mean, this stresses me out thinking about. Does it take you forever to get perfectly set up and focused right in the right spot, or do you just?
After a while, I've gotten used to it just because I do macro photography a couple hours a day. But
Yeah.
when I first started out, I was just, where it's hit and miss, it was always a miss. It was always a miss, and so I guess the hardest thing to do is to just kind of get your camera at the right angle to get that snowflake right, and that's where I'm going to explain a little bit later how I do that. Let's move on to the next slide here.
Yeah.
Here's another snowflake. It was captured on glass. Couple suggestions with the glass. Just get
Hold
some.
on.
Yes.
I think I just passed 1 sec. I think we just went past the snowflake on glass. You were just talking about the snowflake on glass. Can you see my screen? Sorry, y'all.
Okay. This one is the snowflake on glass right here.
Yeah,
Yes.
this one.
So
Yep.
keep it here. So
Okay.
this snowflake was on glass. My suggestion to you is get a piece like a 5x7 or a 6x8 piece of glass. Don't get it something massive because it's going to be harder to maneuver. Wrap some black electrical tape around the edge so you don't cut yourself, for one, and also so it's easier to hold. It gives you something rubbery to hold with your glass. I would also suggest drawing a little square with a permanent marker and trying to make sure you know exactly where your camera is going to be set up with, and move that snowflake, or try to get that snowflake to that square so that you know where you're looking. Because when you're at 4x magnification or 2.5 or 3x magnification, it's tough to find that subject, especially on something that's clear like glass. You can see here that there's some color behind the glass. I just took my business card, which had some blue on it and some white, and then put that behind the glass by about an inch or so. And that way I got some color behind it to get a little bit of clarity for the snowflake, and some, some depth, and so you could see the lines of the snowflake.
Yeah, that's insane. So how do you get the snowflakes onto the glass? What do you do?
Well, you can do one of two things. You can, I've got a large piece of glass that I'll catch the snowflakes on, and then you can take a paintbrush that's been left out overnight in the cold, and then just use the bristles on the paintbrush to pick up the snowflake and set it to where you want to on your smaller piece of glass.
That's amazing.
Or, if it snowed that morning and it's, 10, 12 degrees out and nothing's really melted, you can always just kind of take a branch and shake it a little bit outside and catch whatever snowflakes you can on that glass, and use snowflakes that have been out for a little bit. And when we're talking snowflakes, when people say, "Oh, you take pictures of those big snowflakes," the ones that are size of a nickel that you see coming down during heavy snow. No, these are that's about 100 snow crystals all in one. So I'm taking pictures of the individual snow crystals here, and that's what I want you guys to be able to do. Because with the 60, pardon me, let's move forward.
Yep.
With the you can see here with the 60 millimeter macro lens, just using that, it's a great lens. Your field of view at 1:1 is going to be 17.5 8.3 millimeters wide. So something that is, a 2 millimeter wide snowflake on a 17 millimeter sensor, it's not going to take up very much space on that picture. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to use less of the sensor, and get that subject to be a little bit bigger on that picture. And so here's an example. So we're going to take a medium-sized grain of sand. It's 2 millimeters wide, about the size of a small snowflake. And I'm using the Olympus EM1 Mark III with their teleconverter. I use two 10 millimeter extension tubes, like I was telling you guys before, and then that attached the 60 millimeter macro lens to that teleconverter. And the resulting image is a 5.1 millimeter wide image showing the sand grain in clear focus. It was a stack of 70 images, and I use
Wow.
two out of 10 for your focus bracketing settings. Now, you're going to take these pictures and then you're going to have to do post-processing later, because you're not going to be processing these 70 images in your camera. You're going to be taking those images and stacking them in either Photoshop. There's a software called Zerine, I think it's called. And then I use Helicon. And so I use Method C in Helicon. So we'll move to the next slide here. This is an example of what's of photographing just that same 2 millimeter wide grain of sand with just your 60 millimeter macro lens. You're not getting quite the detail. It's still a great picture and you can still see a lot, especially with the micro four thirds sensor, which is, that 17 millimeters wide, but and you can see the dime next to it. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to really get that detail and break out that detail that you can see in a snowflake, that just blows the socks, off of your Canon or Nikon loving friends.
Yeah, you're going for super macro here.
Yeah, this is super macro, and I know a lot of you guys are probably thinking, well, I don't get to see snow, so what can I do with this? So what I'm telling you to do is, when you've gone to, if you're in Florida and you've got those tiny shells that you can barely see, put it on something like fabric like this and photograph it. That's what I do in the winter when it's not snowing. Is my hobby is to photograph grains of sand with this method. That was on the first slide. You'll see, if you go back on the first slide, you'll see on the bottom right there's a grain of sand. I've photographed about 3,000 different grains of sand over the last couple years. You can see there. So. And that's using the same setup that I was talking about before, but I'm using the Raynox 505 for that. So, you can use this to photograph sand. You can use this to photograph your shells, your tiny seashells. Dewdrops. On people like to photograph dewdrops with something behind it, like a flower. You can do something like that. There's really a lot that you can do with this. So. Let's see here. I think, yeah. So let's go to the last slide here, because I don't know what my time limit is, or if I'm running out of time.
We're running out, but you can finish up this one. Yeah.
All right. So here,
wow.
I added the Raynox 250 macro filter on the end of the setup,
wow.
And then I get a field of view of 3 millimeters, that's what shows up on my field of view for that shot. So. And that was stacked, 110 images I stacked for that grain of sand. And that's the same amount of that's the same amount of images I used to stack for this snowflake image. And that snowflake was also 2 millimeters wide.
Sorry, I think I have something in my eye. I'm going blind.
You must.
It's driving me crazy.
So
it's hard to be on a live show and have something in your eye, right?
No, I understand. And I don't know if I haven't been checking to see if there's been any questions or anything like that, but I can go on and answer some of the questions later, or you can people can feel free to contact me.
Yeah, and I'll throw your banner back up one sec. Yeah, mostly it's been a lot of people saying, oh my gosh, these are incredible. There's a lot of incredible, because honestly, it's unbelievable how up close you can get to snowflakes. It blows my mind.
Yeah. Well, And like I said, if anyone has any questions, I'm more willing to answer after the fact. I get about 10 to 15 people a day just asking me, what do you use? What do you use for your setup? And so I'm always pushing Olympus, and
We appreciate
yeah.
that.
Well, and and to be honest, there's no other system out there that can do this. That can do this at 9x magnification with these lenses. Everything else is going to be a lot farther out and not as much detail. So
So let's end it on our high note. Winter's cold. Can you tell us a
yes,
little bit about it? It's cold. Pack your gloves. Be warm.
yeah, absolutely. Be warm. Keep your batteries warm. Keep an extra set of batteries in your pocket. So
Fair enough.
yeah.
Well, it was super nice having you on, and we did run a little bit over time, so I'm going to jump to our next person, and I'm super sorry,
All right.
but everyone's chilling on our YouTube channel, so if you want to jump in there, you can also answer questions in there. Somebody did just ask you about a magnifier question, so if you want to answer them, you
I will
can.
do that.
Yeah, but mostly it's been people saying that that was incredible, and Chris McGinnis, one of our veterans from the show, is down there on Facebook, I think. Maybe he's on YouTube, I'm not sure,
Okay.
giving you props as well. So
All right.
it was awesome having
Thank you.
And thank you.
Glad to be here.
Awesome.
Bye-bye.
So, oh, sorry, I cut him off. I didn't mean to. Sorry, Ethan. Normally I have lots of backup on this show, and I'm running it all by myself tonight, guys, and I think you can tell that, so bear with me. I know that you guys have been here with me for, gosh, it's almost been a year now, and you know that there's lots of ups and downs of live broadcasts, so if I mess up, don't get too mad at me. I'm trying my best. But next up, I am going to introduce our next guest, and his name is Eric Rock. How's it going, Eric?
Hi, Michelle. Good to see you.
Nice to see you.
Excellent here. Hey, it's ironic. The sun just popped out here. It's been overcast all day in Bozeman, Montana, and as soon as you welcomed me on, the sun broke through. So, pretty
That's
cool.
awesome. I'm glad that you're getting some sunshine in Bozeman, Montana.
Yeah.
So that's where
we
you're
have a
from?
good bit of sunshine, but it's been cloudy today, so it was kind of, I won't say gloomy, but it wasn't our typical day here. So it's good to see you, and thanks for asking me to come on.
Well, I'm glad that the room brightened up for you, so now you can get your fresh, sunny energy, right?
Yep. How about Ethan? Man, that guy is dedicated to his art. That was awesome. I learned a few things from him, and I thought I knew macro, but that was really awesome.
I'm not as talented as him. I can't get things in focus that small. That
It's
was my
dedication.
main question. Like, how do you get the focus on that tiny, tiny object?
Yeah. So
Patience. So
it's still winter here, but and don't get me wrong, I'm going to enjoy the next couple months worth of winter. Looking forward to it, but I also love talking about spring. So thank you for giving me that slot.
yes.
So go ahead. Do you have a question for me there?
I was just going to ask you. Well, we know you're from Bozeman, Montana, but can you tell us a little bit about what you photograph and why you're out photographing things?
Well, I pretty much everything's fair game for me. But as far as photography, I tend to, when I'm really relaxed and I'm enjoying myself when I'm not working, or when I'm working, I'm often photographing wildlife, nature type subjects. But I do some cultural trips, things like that. What I normally do is I lead photo tours or photo safaris around the world. Far corners, I've been to some pretty cool places. Most of the places I'd go back to, if I haven't gone back again and again, I would go back to in a heartbeat. It's pretty rare that I go to a place where I don't want to take people to. So I'm very lucky that way.
That's awesome. I love having photo tour leaders on the show, because then I'm like, will you take us to a place? Let's go photograph. You can teach me how to capture these amazing wildlife.
I would welcome it.
Im-
If I tell my boss, Joseph Van Os Photo Safaris, it's good that I don't own the company, because every cool person out there, I'd give them a free trip to go along with me, just because I want to hang out with them. I love doing this stuff on my own, but it's really a lot more fun to share it with people when you got them right there and say, well, look at this, come on. And then, give them suggestions for what camera settings, or, how to frame it, and just have some fun with them. So it's a great way to have fun with people.
Well, and it's got to be more fun to be with like-minded people too. When I take my kids and my husband out on my experiences, they get so annoyed with me 2 hours later with my camera out, and I'm like, shh, we'll get lunch later. I'm trying to get this photo.
Absolutely. I know that. I've had that experience in the past with friends and some family members too, but
Yeah.
Most of them know now if they go out with me, whether it's, sit by a pond or go on a photo walk, that's what it's going to be. It's going to be about patience.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, let's take a look at some of your shots. Do you want to dive into a little bit of your work?
Yeah, please, let's do that.
Awesome.
Okay, what I'd like to let's talk about the slide first, and I'll talk a little bit about what went into it. Okay, this is actually from a trip a couple of years ago with Drew Hamilton and I. I think you know Drew from from an earlier live event with you. Phenomenal naturalist leader, just a wonderful friend to have, and we did kind of a buddy trip one time to Nome, Alaska, and Alaska, I'll tell you right up front, Alaska is probably my one happy place because when I think about spring, I think about how long we wait for it in Alaska. And then when it comes, it just comes in like gangbusters and everything's happening all at once. It's just an awesome time to be there. But on this particular trip to Nome, Drew and I went up there mainly to photograph some of the Arctic migrating birds that come into the area. But also, I happen to know from earlier times, it's a great place to find musk oxen. And if you go early enough in the spring, you get these nice young calves who've just been born. Oftentimes there's still snow on the ground when they're hitting the ground. So these nice young calves, which are like little furry toys running around out on the tundra. And so this is from that trip. But also along with just the musk oxen up there, or musk ox, it's a great time to be photographing birds. And everywhere you go, the air is just full of bird song and the fluttering of birds moving from bush to bush across the tundra, maybe even out on the what most people would say was flat, barren tundra. There'll be birds out there, even as the snow is melting away. So I would have to say that's my spring happy place. Although I have no problem with chasing spring from Florida the whole way up to Alaska, that's for sure. So,
All right. So where was this? Was this Alaska or was this Florida?
no, this is actually out on the island. I was living out on Vashon Island for most of 2022, and this is just in a backyard. And a lot of my photography happens here in the backyard or any place I'm at. If I'm staying at a lodge somewhere, a lot of times I'll be photographing just in that lodge as well. So everything's fair game for me. This is just spring is a lot about color. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about this shot. What you're seeing there, a lot of out of focus foreground. A lot of people like to use out of focus background. Oftentimes what I'll do is I'll take a subject, like in this case it's a dark-eyed junco. It's a common feeder bird or backyard bird over most of North America. And a lot of times you're watching them, you think it might be a sparrow out there or something, but I happen to watch this guy singing and advertising his territory for a potential mate. And so I was watching him, and then I kind of moved around this one particular fruit tree till I could frame him with the blossoms around him, and then shot him using the color primarily as a subject. Dress up what would normally be a bird that most people might walk right by, the LBBs, little brown birds, most people say. So spring is a great time for color, and I try to bring that into my wildlife shots in some way or another. I would say most of the time when I'm photographing birds, I'm using a fairly long lens. I love the 300 f4. That's probably my favorite walk-around lens for bird photography. In fact, there's almost always one within arm's reach of me. Here in the house or wherever I'm at, if I'm in a vehicle, it's almost always on the seat next to me, ready to go. And I would tell people that, in this particular situation, I was shooting the 150 to 400, which is an amazing lens. I got to tell you, it's probably the best wildlife lens ever made. And I've shot a lot of glass in my past with other companies, but that lens is just amazing what it can do. Birds, mammals, and having a zoom.
Oh no. I think we froze. I agree with him. The 150 to 400 is insane. I just got to use a sample of it this week and it's been awesome. I'm hoping that Eric is going to find his way back to us momentarily. Somebody told me that Mercury was in retrograde this week, and I don't really believe in that sort of thing, but my computer has been having issues all day, so who knows? Maybe that is true. Dang it, Eric. What happened? Well, we might have to jump ahead to summer and bring Eric back, and we can time travel back to the spring, and hopefully we will get Eric back. Let me just bring up the next set of slides and introduce our summer friend. And I apologize, guys. Like I said, live show. We're doing the best we can tonight. So tonight, I'm going to introduce another guest. We're going to go on to summer, and we are going to meet Alex. Alex, welcome. I'm sorry that you're jumping the gun, but come on down.
Nah, I feel bad for Eric. He was getting going there, talking about that giant white lens. It is incredible.
The giant white lens.
I've gotten to use it a little bit, and yeah, I agree with him. Best wildlife lens that's ever been made.
I agree. I literally just got to use the sample the other day, and I have like my whole bird set up in the background, and I've got plenty of the LBBs, the little brown birds in my yard. Mm-hmm. And even still, they look like magnificent little beasts with that lens. It's phenomenal. Yeah.
But that lens might be a little big for me, as I'm mainly doing the astrophotography.
Fair.
There we go.
That's totally fair. So what is your favorite Olympus lens then? What's your go-to?
Okay. So right now I have on there is the 17 millimeter Pro, which I love for more of the wider angle nightscape Milky Way shots. My favorite one, if I want to reach a little bit deeper, is the 40 to 150 2.8 Pro. The compact size and everything sits on my tracker really nicely. And the one nice thing, I think it's partially the Micro Four Thirds system, and it's also partially how good these Pro lenses are. The corner sharpness wide open on both of these is incredible. So the stars up in this area don't get all bird wingy. They stay really nice and sharp. So both of those lenses are really, really fun to use.
That's awesome. So Alex, where are you based out
of? The Breckenridge, Colorado area. Way up high in the mountains.
So you're in a great dark area for stars, right?
Yeah, we have a really nice combination of low humidity, high altitude, and not too much light pollution that lets us get really clear shots of the stars.
That's awesome. I'm very jealous. I live near a city, so sometimes I can if I'm really lucky and it's really clear. All right, so let's take a look at your setup really quick. I love this shot. It's gorgeous.
Yes. So this is the 10-mile range outside of Breckenridge, Colorado. You can see a little bit of the light pollution from the town there. But those are the tallest couple of over 14,000-foot mountains. And to shoot this, I was on my EM1 Mark III and the 17 millimeter 1.2 Pro. And I'm also using the Move Shoot Move Star Tracker, which, if anyone's unfamiliar, it rotates your camera counter to the rotation of the Earth. So in doing that, it keeps the stars still relative to your camera, allowing you to photograph for a much longer time and still not get any star trails.
That's impressive. Very impressive. And this is the advanced astro class tonight, guys. Not just our normal Milky Way. He's got math involved.
Yeah, and I guess a little bit about my style, and it's kind of my philosophy for life, is I'm not one to read a manual or do anything the way I should. Like when I got my amazing Olympus camera here, I didn't go on YouTube. I didn't research it. I just started trying stuff. So a few of the things that I'm going to share tonight aren't traditional. They're not exactly what normal astro work would be consisting of, but guys like Peter Baumgarten and the others have done incredible work with the Olympus system, showing how traditional astrophotography should be done, and I get a little weird with it. So
yeah. We're gonna look outside the box.
Yeah.
There we go.
So I'm gonna quickly highlight 3 of the features within Olympus cameras that set them apart from every other camera manufacturer, and they make astro shots easier and more interesting. This one I think is fairly well known, but to get these star trails like this, I'm using the live composite mode, which records the brightest data reaching the sensor over the period of time you have it exposing and saves the brightest pixels. So traditionally, to make a shot like this one, you would be taking one shot after another of maybe 30-second exposures for several hours, resulting in several hundred photos that you have to get onto your computer, stack, align, process, and it's a lot more work. And the Olympus camera does all of this work for us in body, which is so much nicer. So a couple of tips for how you're actually going to go about doing this. You want to think about your composition. So for this, we were out in Joshua Tree in California. I knew that I wanted the rotation of those stars to be centered right over one of the trees. So in order to do this in the northern hemisphere is to find the North Star. There's a lot of apps that you can use for this, or if you're familiar with the night sky, you can look between the constellation of the Big Dipper and Cassiopeia, which is shaped like a crooked W. Draw an imaginary line between them, and the star that's kind of isolated right in the middle is the North Star. So you can use that to to frame your composition, place it exactly where you'd like. Now, a couple of things that are really essential for the live composite shooting is that you want to take a few test shots in manual mode before you commit to the really long process of the live composite. And while you're doing this, you're making sure that you like your composition. For example, I wanted the tree just off-centered to the right side, and I wanted a little bit of the mountains in the background, and it took me several shots to get that composition. The next thing you want to make sure is that you have the proper exposure for your stars. If you are letting in too much light, you'll still get a nice image, but all of your stars will be white. And as we know, the night sky is filled with a bunch of different colors. Here we have a little bit of green air glow, magenta air glow that's being twirled, and also the stars are predominantly a nice orange to blue color, which is more natural. So when you're taking your test shots, you want to use your histogram by reviewing your photos and pressing the info button that will change the display on the back of the camera. And you want to make sure that your highlights aren't too far over to the one side where they'll be peaking, they'll be overexposed, and you'll lose all of the color. So once you get your test shots all organized, you want to make sure that you know how long your exposure was, because when you switch into live composite mode, you're going to adjust inside of that mode how long you want each exposure to be and how long you want your total exposure time to be. And once you're locked into that, you're kind of set. It's going to be doing its thing until it's done. Another little tip is I used a headlamp and very lightly light painted the tree. And this is another thing you can test before you commit to the live composite mode. In manual mode, just light paint that tree. You can see the settings there were 1600 ISO, f1.8, 15 seconds. And that is what I set in the live composite mode. And then I let it run for 2 hours. Quick note about your aperture, even as great as the pro lenses are, wide open at 1.2, they still have a little bit of chromatic aberration. So stopping it down to f1.8 to 2.8 will help reduce that to give you a more natural color. With this, I could have gone to something like 30 seconds in f2.8, and that's something I might do in the future to help out with that color a little bit. Any questions on this one, or do we get to hop to the next?
No, we get to hop to the next.
All right, let's
really
do
nice.
it.
I was going to ask you where it was. I figured it was Joshua Tree being in California, and I'm like, oh, I know these little trees.
Yeah, it's a great spot.
Awesome. That's awesome. All right, this one blows my mind. I've showed this slide to so many people before this episode because I was like, oh my gosh, look at this. So tell us how you got this shot, because I know this is an unconventional one a little bit too.
Yeah, and this one is something that a lot of people will debate on, but I really enjoyed the process that I used to create this. So what we're looking at is the Orion Nebula, which is the bigger pink part of the nebula, and then just up and to the left is called the Running Man Nebula. So they call it the birthplace of stars, all kinds of crazy cosmic gases, super hot temperatures, and they'll combine to form stars out of this nebula.
So crazy.
The traditional way of shooting deep space astrophotography is to get a large tracker, which I was using. It's a medium-sized tracker, the Skywatcher Star Adventurer, and to shoot dozens to hundreds of identical frames in a row because there is so little light reaching your sensor. You want to optimize your signal to noise ratio by shooting a ton of frames and combining them in several different programs that can stack them to reduce the noise. But I decided as soon as I got my camera on my tracker that I wanted to play around with the high resolution modes that Olympus offers. So there's the tripod high resolution mode, which I didn't have very much success with at night. But using the handheld high resolution mode on a tracker, on a tripod, actually does some pretty incredible things. And it is counterintuitive. So that's why I'm saying, like, we're thinking outside of the box here with how we can use our gear. Going through the handheld high resolution mode, you are maxed out at a 60-second exposure time, but your camera is going to automatically take 16 images in a row and combine the best ones and automatically align the stars for you. And it's stacking them. And I was shocked when I got the results back the first time I tried this, because it's not just aligning and stacking, it's also doing in-camera noise reduction stacking, like things that you would use Photoshop or Deep Sky Stacker or many other programs. It's doing it all for you. Now, it does take a long time. You have to leave it out and exposing for a while, and it's kind of shocking how long it takes. But it saves so much time once you get onto the computer, and it's still giving you a really colorful and dynamic raw image that you can manipulate from there to get different results, however you want to do your editing. So for this shot in particular, I took 5 of those handheld high resolution images and then stacked those in Photoshop just to get a better, cleaner signal to noise ratio, and the results are amazing, I think.
I think it's incredible. I would have not thought to do this, and ever since I watched your YouTube channel like a year ago and you talking about doing this, and I was just like, I would have never thought, and I work here, I would have never thought. This is not officially sanctioned by Olympus or OM System, by the way, to use handheld high res to trace the stars. But if it works, it works. And this is where we really kind of push our equipment and try something new that we've never done before, which is just mind blowing. Was it super frustrating the first couple times you tried it and didn't get it right and had to wait 5 minutes of exposures and then?
Yeah, the weird thing is, too, that it can work on a tripod without a tracker. It's kind of a goofy thing, but I really think the camera is sensing the constant pixels and aligning them and not relying so much on the vibrations from your hand. Again, this is not sanctioned by Olympus. It is just kind of what I've experienced. So you
this is pseudoscience, guys.
Yes. So you can take it and just point it at the stars and then point it at the foreground, and you'll get a less noisy image, and then you can combine them. But yeah, there was a few times when it would fail to composite, or just it would give me solid foreground and streaky stars, and I didn't know what was going on. But through some trial and error, it's working out pretty well.
Yeah. I did actually try it on Milky Way stuff, not quite this amazing deep space that you're doing, but wider angles and faster shutter speeds. And I was able to get really cool Milky Way shots with it.
Awesome.
You know, nothing as impressive as yours, but I loved your tip and I thought it was really cool, and I tried it and it did work okay for me, and I was happy.
Great. Glad it worked.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's go to our next one.
Yes, I love this one.
Now, this is a way of getting a little bit more artistic with your compositions and doing some things that aren't exactly natural, but it's kind of the borderline between science and art, which I think all photography is kind of straddling that line. So this is a composite, and I think it's important to be transparent with that. This is not a single image of the night sky. The sky I took with the 17mm lens on the EM1.3, and I used the handheld high resolution mode to capture it. And I really wanted to get this blurry waterfall effect, but the images I was taking at night just didn't quite work out. So I went back there during the day, and this was shot at about 8:30 in the morning, so there was some diffused sunlight coming through the clouds. And for this, I used the Live ND function of the Olympus camera. because I really wanted that blurry waterfall, and I didn't have an ND filter. I didn't want to just manually take a whole bunch of photos and combine them on Photoshop. So
Yeah.
that's another really cool thing that these Olympus cameras offer, is the ability to do all of that work for you. A couple of tips if you are trying to make a composite that looks and has the feel of being at night is to avoid direct sunlight, because the shadows, imagine if all the trees had really
Yep.
strong shadows, that would be a pretty dead giveaway. So I was able to use some cloud cover for that. And if you want to maintain the integrity of the photo, you can use Photo Pills, which is an app on your phone that you can have an overlay of the night sky that uses your camera, so you can see exactly where the Milky Way or different parts of the sky will be at different times of day. So using that, I know that this is a authentic orientation of the sky, even if it wasn't shot all at the same time.
Impressive.
What else do I have on there? Oh yeah, star autofocus is incredible. That doesn't really apply to live ND, but it works super well, and I love using it. But to make this composite, I blended these two images together in Photoshop. And Photoshop's become such a long ways in the past few years with their sky replacement feature, with their masking features, that it's really made my job a whole lot easier combining those.
Somebody did just ask, do you use the image overlay function in the camera for the composite? But you just said you use Photoshop. I think they were asking if you are using the multiple exposures, which
that
you
is interesting.
Could.
That is a really interesting thing to go experiment with.
Right?
Okay.
I was just thinking that. Because as long as it's a raw file, you can use any raw file as an overlay. So technically, you could always have a Milky Way in your pocket ready to go.
Yeah. See, that's another thing. Like, there's so much potential locked into these cameras that breaking out of your mindset of what traditional and right is can open up a lot of different opportunities.
Yeah, that's impressive. So somebody asked, and I'm not 100% sure, but how much move, shoot, move will work in deep space photography, astrophotography. So how much of that?
So yes, the move, shoot, move is this rotator right here, and it is a small, compact, lightweight rotator. It doesn't have a constant reticle to line it up with the North Star. It is meant to be efficient, lightweight, backpacker friendly. I've used the 40 to 150 at 150 and gotten, I think, 90-second exposures without star trails. I have not put the 300 millimeter on this tracker. It is not built for that. It probably would not have great success for something that long. You would want to go with something like the Skywatcher Star Adventurer or the Ioptron, whatever the name of that Ioptron tracker is. They have counterweight systems where off of the rotator they have a bar with a counterweight here that compensates for the weight of the camera, and it reduces the strain on the gears so that that heavier 300 millimeter lens isn't just yanking on the gears and causing them to fail. So move, shoot, move is fantastic for wide angle, okay for medium deep space, but beyond the 40 to 150, I don't recommend it.
Nice. I am mind blown by all the things that you can do in astrophotography. I've watched your videos on this on your YouTube channel before, and everyone's much better at photography than me, which is why I just run the live streams, right?
I feel like that when I'm watching these guys with their wildlife or focus or macro or coming up with the live composite stuff. So yeah, we're all learning, aren't we?
Yeah. But it's great. I love doing these episodes because with everyone out there in the comment section on YouTube and on Facebook, I'm learning along with all of you guys. And I'm like, there are so many things I've taken away from these episodes and been like, I should try that next. Hopefully someday I'll be as good of a photographer as you. But I don't know about deep space yet. I'm not sure if I can do that.
It is cold at night too. There's that whole thing.
Yeah, and I hate being cold. All right. So I think I think your end was try something different, which I think everything you showed us was something different and outside of the box. Is there anything you want to last final words about trying?
Yeah, I would just say exactly what it says there is to try stuff, because a lot of the things that I'm doing and some other people are doing shouldn't work, but they manage to work. So before we get like too negative about anything, go try it. See if it works, and then we'll see. It's always a fun adventure to find out what these cameras can do.
Drew, our friend Drew, who is also a veteran from this episode, wants to know if you're going if
Hi,
you're
Drew.
going to do a talk about bears. Hi, Drew. Drew has also been on Home with Olympus and me.
I would love to do a talk about bears, but I feel compared to Drew and a few of those others, I am not the most qualified. So I would love to be a guest during Drew's conversation.
There we go. Well, Alex, thank you so much for hanging out with us and sharing your summer star trails and deep space. Thank you. I appreciate your time tonight. And we're going to try to get Eric back, if you're cool with that. All right. Bye. All right, I'm bringing Eric back on. Everybody cross our fingers. We're going to time travel. We're going back to spring. Welcome back, Eric.
Hey, all right. Hey, sorry, I take full responsibility for that. That was my computer. I'm on my backup computer now, so hopefully everything sounds as good or looks as, well, I won't say looks as good, but we were talking.
We're happy to have you back.
I'm
just happy you're here. Look, I found your slides. We're good to go.
Perfect. We were talking about wildlife, and since Drew's listening in, I'll mention bears. Okay, in a little bit. All right, because I know he's just waiting to hear that. So I was talking about, photography, wildlife photography, springtime. It can happen in your backyard. It can happen in a park down the road from your place. It can happen in a national park, refuge. There are many places around the country, around North America, around the world where you can photograph wildlife. It doesn't have to be an exotic location. What I would recommend people do is they do some planning. First off, think about what you want to photograph when spring comes around. Think about what you see, what you know about, maybe do a little research. No matter what you do, whether you're doing wildlife or landscapes or cultural photography, it's only going to be that much better for you. So do your research now and get excited about spring. Do your planning now and get excited about spring. You can see from my settings, I like to tell people, when you're shooting wildlife, you're in most cases, and I like to have fun and kind of push this a little bit too, you're looking for fast shutter speeds that capture action, get good sharp images, but there are times where you might want to avoid that. So I usually start out using what I call my highest acceptable ISO for a particular situation. And this one you can see I used ISO 800, which isn't by far, there's a lot higher ISOs you can use with the Olympus cameras, but this is the one I settled into this particular day because the amount of light and the type of light. And I'm usually almost always shooting pretty close to wide open when I'm shooting wildlife. And that's the bonus of Micro Four Thirds, is you get a little bit, even though you're shooting wide open, you get a little bit more depth of field based on the sensor size, or as one of the effects of the sensor size. So I really like that aspect to it. And oftentimes I'm shooting handheld just because Olympus gear is so much lighter, and the image stabilization. I think anybody who shoots with it will understand that one. And it's just a game changer for anybody walking around photographing birds, like the little dark-eyed junco. I'm
questioning this. On your settings, we have 1/50th of a second. Is that a typo?
Nope, that's
you were handheld with the 150 to 400 at 1/50th of a second.
Yeah, I don't get every image is sharp, but I can pull them out. And I've even done longer exposures. I was shooting down in Bosque del Apache just middle of December, handhelding, and I was shooting at 40th of a second with cranes and getting blurred crane shots and stuff from the birds, but the foreground was tack sharp. So
you must be much calmer than me. I think I'm just way too shaky.
It depends on how much coffee I've had, and I can really notice the difference. So let's go on to the next slide and see. Okay, I'm not going to pull up a bear just yet, but let's talk about, you've done your research, where to look for particular animals, how to be safe around them. And by the way, since we will mention bears here, bears, moose, things like that, if you're not sure and you haven't done research, these are animals that could be potentially pretty dangerous. Actually, almost any animal from a squirrel up can be dangerous. And there I can see Drew commenting in with the bears. But I would recommend, working with animals like this, go with if you're not sure of what you're doing, go with a very experienced guide leader like Drew Hamilton when you start talking about bears. Tell you what, he is one of the few. I'll put a handful of photographer leaders, guides out there that I trust with my life, and a situation like that, and Drew Hamilton is on the top of that list. So just there, hopefully that got enough bears for him for now.
Yeah.
So again, I use telephotos or zoom lenses to give myself some good, safe working distance. I don't want to stress an animal. I want to give them the opportunity to make a living. With a lot of these animals, they're coming out of winter. They're in a negative energy balance, so they need to regain a lot of their body conditions. So the less they have to react to people or a photographer like me, hey, the better they're going to be. So give them some distance. Don't stress them. Try not to change their behavior is a good way. Watch for the action. With bears and moose, a fun thing that happens, if you're paying some attention to them, after they've had their head underwater for a little bit, they don't like water in their ears. So the first thing they do when they pick their head up out of the water is they shake it like this moose is doing. And, springtime is a good time to photograph bears, especially for the young cubs. The cubs are fresh out of the den, their first year cubs. Then they're like little furry toys basically running around. And their antics can be a lot to photograph. For moose, elk, and say deer, it's not the best time. So you have to be really creative to photograph those animals because they're losing their hair, replacing their hair from the previous winter, going into their summer coat. They look a little bit more ragged. In this situation, waiting for the moose to come out into the water, so most of that's hidden or kind of wet down, was a good way to go. Watching for the action, watching for the shake. You can see I use a little faster shutter speed for this to capture the water flying through the air to freeze those droplets. That's a place where I'll really work on, a fast shutter speed to make sure I get good, crisp water droplets flying through the air. And I think that's good for now. We can go ahead and move on to the other slide.
Somebody did just want to ask real quickly, do you use Pro Capture in your images?
Beautiful. Let's go to the next slide. It's perfect timing. I love that one. Works like, yes.
It lines perfectly.
As Buddy the elf would say, yes. So let's go. Not only your research will lead you into areas where you're looking for particular birds, and I highly recommend this, whatever animal you're going to photograph. Do some research. Where's the best place to find it? What time of year? What type of behaviors they're going to do? And birds do present. There are a lot more birds out there than there are mammals. Sorry, Drew. And a lot more other mammals than bears. Sorry again, Drew. But, birds, they're almost everywhere. They're in your backyard. They're at the local park. Learn a little bit about them. Get out and spend some time. Now, I like to do what I call photo walks, where I'll go out walking and looking for birds. But if I have special birds I'm looking for, I'll do what I call pond sitting. And it might not just be a pond, it might be a stream or a river. And I'll spend my time maybe just sitting in one spot for that opportunity for the action to happen. In this situation, I was watching American avocets, one of my favorite birds. They're kind of like the ballerinas of the shorebird world when you look at them and the way they scoot around on the water. So I was at a local wildlife refuge, just found my spot on the ground close to the water and let the birds settle in. And I noticed that it's springtime, so the birds are just starting to pair up a little bit. So what I noticed is, as a group of birds would come in from one side, another group would come in, and they'd always get into a little bit of a territorial scuffle, and then one of the birds would often fly out ahead to kind of settle that. And so I was ready just by spending some time watching while I was doing my pond setting. I was just waiting for the action. Now, this is a great place to use Pro Capture, and I do use it. I actually have it set up on one of my custom settings, so I can go right to it. I don't have to, go up to the corner, up to my corner button, push it and scroll through. I just go right to the custom setting. It's all set up, ready to go. Mm-hmm. Now, for situations like this, what's important is where do you rest your autofocus sensor or your autofocus point, right? Usually when I'm shooting things like the moose in the water or the bird, the dark-eyed junco in the tree, I'll use the smallest little point and try to keep that right on the bird just to get through all the foliage or, not having the reflection distracting it or taking away from it. But in a situation like this, I oftentimes, when I've got movement, action, especially smaller subjects, I'll use a cluster of 5 autofocus points. And a lot of times I'll put it in and I'll rest that in an area where I want to put my subject and then try to keep the subject underneath that group of sensors. If it's a little bit difficult, maybe they're moving around a little bit too fast or more erratic, then if you have the EM1X, then you can use bird detect with tracking. And that's pretty phenomenal. I often go back and I give that a test to see how well it does. And, I think it's trying to keep up with me. because I think, or else I'm slowing down because I think it's doing a better job than when I first gave it a try. And so I'm relying on it more. So those two things alone, like the, pro capture and, using the bird detect tracking is just another game changer for anybody out there photographing fast moving small subjects like this. So, and this bird's only about maybe, 14 inches tall at the most when it stands up straight. So it's not a very big bird. And you can see I'm shooting down low and working it pretty hard. So even if I don't get a shot from a moment like this, I just appreciate being out there with them. And again, one of my favorite things to do. So hopefully that opens, explains the pro capture answer, or answers that question for you.
It kind of did. That all worked out perfectly.
Yeah, it's nice when it works out that way.
I love these little birds. I've tried to photograph them, and my shots are just of them, eating bugs mostly.
That's pretty cool though too. That's pretty cool.
That's awesome. Well, I think, take advantage of the weather. That's your slide.
Springtime. If you haven't, a couple of my photos earlier had water in it. If you live in northern latitudes, ponds are opening up, streams are defrosting. It's a focus point for life. I mentioned my pond sitting. In this particular image, I'm actually sitting in the pond. And I'm actually probably about chest deep in the water. I have chest waders on. I've got a little hide that floats with the camera on it. And it's really fun, but I go out in all weather. And in this situation, I just happen to be in the hide. It starts raining. The birds are perfectly comfortable with me. And so I feel like I'm kind of part of their world when I'm in this situation, whether I'm sitting in a floating hide or standing in a floating hide like this, or I'm in my hide, maybe out in the backyard photographing songbirds. It puts me in the place in a whole different way to kind of relax and enjoy what's going on around me. And I get to watch wildlife a little bit too. And early on, when I started photographing birds, I realized that if you watch them, especially waterfowl like this, if they're spending their time preening, it's not the most exciting time to be photographing them. They're kind of moving their head. Oftentimes their head's buried in their feathers. But if you wait just enough, when they're done, what they'll usually do is they'll do a stretch like this. So keep your eye on, anticipate. And again, it's by going out, spending the time, and you don't have to move around too much. You can spend your time in one spot. You don't have to wear camouflage. You don't have to be in a hide. I find oftentimes if I just sit down close to a place where I want to be, over time, the wildlife becomes a little bit more accustomed to me and moves in a little bit closer, goes about its business. And that's usually when the shots happen, is I'm more relaxed, the wildlife is more relaxed, and I'm enjoying the heck out of my time. So, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. And I apologize about what was going on here with the computer, but it was kind of fun to scramble and get back online after Alex.
Oh, yes. I'm sure it was fun for you. My heart was racing the whole time.
I owe you big time, okay? I owe you big time.
That's okay. There is never a dull moment in this live show. And usually when I get done with every episode, I go...
I can understand that. I'm going to do it too. So you don't have...
Right.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I really do appreciate it. And thank you very much.
Yeah, we are super happy to have had you, and I'm very, very glad that you were able to make it back and you were able to share with us what you do in the spring. And I know weather sealing is great up north in the spring because it rains all the time. I'm from the north, I know. So it's great that you have the opportunity to take these images and go out and enjoy nature. In the pond, I probably wouldn't do, but I'm glad that it is very enjoyable for you.
It's cold. It gets cold. It gives me about 15 minutes and I'm shivering pretty good, but I'll last about close to an hour sometimes.
Nice. You got to get like heat warmers in your legs or in your boots.
It's a great idea.
Well,
I didn't think about that.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on tonight, Eric. It was really enjoyable having this conversation with you. And I'm so happy you made it back to join us and time travel with us a little.
Thank you. All right. That was like 2 springs in one season.
Yeah. We got to do spring twice. It's like the fake spring when you think summer's coming and then it doesn't come.
Yep. It snows. You get that snowstorm. All right. Stay warm.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eric. We'll talk to you soon. All right. We've got one more guest that we're bringing on tonight. We're going to talk about autumn, which is my favorite time of year because that's when like the leaves change and everything just gets so beautiful. And we are going to talk about some sunsets. So I'm going to bring on Maria. How's it going, Maria?
Good. Welcome. Thanks for having me. Thank you. We saved the best for last. Fall is also my favorite season.
Yes. I'm just going to bring our slides up. Sorry, I've got to get caught up now. Hey, our backgrounds almost match, though. We look really good together with your beautiful sunset. Did you capture that sunset?
I did. Yes, I'm going
Yes.
to talk about this sunset today, actually.
Awesome. So, Maria, tell us quickly a little bit about what you like to photograph and maybe where you're from. What are you into?
Sure, yeah. So I'm originally from Indiana, and we travel a lot. So I do photography sort of all over the country at this point.
Awesome.
My favorite kind of photography, I call it sky things, catchphrase by my husband. And so I like sunsets, I like sunrises, I like space, so I like satellites, I like rockets, I like all of these kinds of things that happen in the sky. I am not, I like everything photography wise, but these are absolutely my favorites. And so we have some of my favorite photos that I've captured. There's some from Cincinnati, some from Bloomington, Indiana, some from Florida, which is that's the rocket launch on the side there, Boone, North Carolina, and a lake in Michigan. So lots of variety here.
Nice. Yeah, the rocket one is my favorite, I think, on this set of slides. I love that. It's just so beautiful.
Thank you.
All right, so let's talk about you and your sunsets, because I know you do something slightly different with your sunsets, a little outside of the box here tonight, too. So, oh, that's the same shot. I love it.
Yep.
It's beautiful. Okay, so I'm going to go to your tip slide because I want to learn, and I want everyone to learn how you did this.
Sure. So this is my favorite, absolute favorite feature from Olympus. Is there a slide that was before this one? Or no? Is this good?
No.
Start? No? Okay.
No,
All right, that's good.
I
That's
might
good.
have lost it.
That's okay.
It's that kind of day.
That's all right. So live composite is what I use for a lot of my sunset photos and sunrise too. I really love doing long exposure, and Olympus makes it incredibly easy to do long exposure. So you guys heard what Alex does with like he showed the live composite with the stars. I like to do those too, and that's what the rocket launch one is actually a live composite, and the space station ones are live composite as well. So it's my absolute favorite feature. Yeah, and it's like literally the best thing I think that Olympus does because nobody else does it. You know, computational photography is the future, and you guys are at the forefront of that. So this is how I'm doing. It's called brushstroke cloud painting because it looks like you have literally taken a brush with acrylics or oils and done the strokes here to get these clouds. I love to do this no matter where I am. Like this is one of those things. It doesn't matter if you have dark skies. It doesn't matter if you have some stunning mountain landscape or anything like that. You can literally go out in your backyard. You can go out your balcony of your apartment, right, and see the sky. As long as you can see it, you can do this kind of photography. So live composite, like Alex was talking about, right, it's adding in new light that it's seen. And so if your clouds are moving, you're going to pick up all of that light and that color in particular in those clouds, and it's going to streak across your exposure, which is really cool. The tips that I have for doing this or doing any sort of long exposure is to keep your camera steady. And so I'm with Alex. I do things sort of weird and out of the box. I like to just use whatever I have. So I have 4 tripods, and yet on this particular day, I decided, you know what, I'm not going to use a tripod. I'm just going to put my camera on this bench that was just conveniently here. And I actually just used my lens cap to prop it up a little bit. So that's what's underneath the camera there. So I like to get a little bit of an angle going up. If you're going straight out, you're going to have a lot of that bench, or if you're using a tripod, you're going to have a lot of that foreground and not as much sky. And I would rather see the sky things. And so prop it up a little bit. Of course, absolutely, you can use a tripod, right? I just didn't want to carry it on this particular jaunt. This is in Huron, Ohio, on Lake Erie. So the lake that you're seeing in the background is Lake Erie. And there's a lighthouse in the opposite direction. That is, I've never gotten a good sunrise or sunset with the lighthouse. It's like right in the middle of looking north where no color ever happens. But that's okay. So you want to keep your camera steady, and however that makes sense for you, right? I've put my camera on benches. I've put my camera on the ground. I've put it on rocks, like at the ocean. If there's rock ledge there, I just put it there. The weather sealing is great, so I'm not worried about it at all, anything like that. So I just use, so good question. So the focus points, I have done a few different things. So a lot of the time when I'm focusing, I'm going out on my horizon, and whatever the horizon level is, I'm like focusing one single point on that. And that's what this was shot with, was a focus point. You can kind of tell if you go straight out on this bench, that's where it's focusing on, which I thought was cool because you get the bench and the light and everything like that. The other thing that I do with my focus, especially for like the space station shots, or sometimes with the sunset if it's getting really dark, is I switch. For me, I have the EM5 Mark III, and I just am using the 14 to 150 lens, and so there's no infinity setting for focus on that. So I picked this up actually with a Home with Olympus talk that we had with a preset manual focus, and I set that to 999.99, and that mimics infinity, and so I've done that as well. For the ISO, thanks Alex for. I like to keep the ISO low, and in this particular case, the sky was still really, really bright, and I would call it lazy. I don't like to use filters. I don't like to have to put filters on and make sure that they're clean, and I figure out, make sure everything is exactly how I want it. So I just drop that ISO as low as it goes. So usually for sunset and sunrise, I'm at either 64 or 200. So yeah, I do, the base ISO is 200. That's the recommended one. So I do that too. But for this case, at 200, it was too bright in that corner, and dropping it down to 64 like fixed it a little bit for me. And so I use the, like, you can see on the screen as you're changing the settings with Olympus, it's all live, and so you can see what it's going to look like, which is my other favorite feature. I pop this out, right, and so I look at what's happening without having to touch anything, just like Ethan was talking about, not with the remote trigger or with the, I just use it on my phone with Olympus capture software on the phone. Yeah, good questions. So for the live composite settings, I also just really like to see what happens. So I'm usually playing around with them. So I'm almost always for sunset and sunrise, I'm at either ISO 64 or 200. I'm trying to think if I ever bump that up. If it's really dark and I can still see, like, there's a little bit of purple left in the sky and maybe I just want to see what I can do, I'll bump it up. For the space station photos, I'm almost always at ISO 1600 because it's dark when those are going by, and so I bumped that up a lot. The live composite settings themselves, you have some things that you want to think about besides the ISO. You also have your aperture, right? And so this, again, if it's still really bright out, I make this close up pretty high. Again, as it gets darker, I will open it up and just kind of see what it's looking like. For sunset and sunrise, I'm almost always starting at a base exposure of 1/2 second, which is the shortest amount of time that you can do with a live composite. For space station photos or for sunsets and sunrises that are maybe not quite as bright, I will sometimes go up. Some of my space station things, I actually have gone up to like 4 seconds to get that streak. If it's a really not very bright space station pass, I'll really get that a lot longer. And so that's that base exposure that your camera's seen, and it's building on top of that. For this particular live composite, I let it run for 6 minutes, and I thought it looked pretty cool. If you run for really, I've done some for 10 minutes and 15 minutes, and it will really fade out the earlier color as the new color comes in, or if there are clouds that come in that are just gray, it'll start to kind of take over. And so you want to watch it and see, how does it look? And maybe the next slide will show a couple of examples.
Yeah, I think it does. Nope.
Yeah.
Yep, oh, yes, it does.
It's good.
Never mind.
These are, differences between like a 1 minute live composite at those same exact settings versus a 3-minute composite at those same settings. And so I kind of just wanted to show the different amounts of streaking with these compared with the other one. And I think I'll have a slide that has all three of them too. So, but this is basically, you know, don't be afraid to play with it. This is just for fun, right? It's just so fun to, it's the best feature, I think, just the best feature. So I just play, I see like, oh, this looks cool, I'm gonna stop it. You know, you don't have to second guess yourself or regret, because there's always going to be some kind of cloud somewhere, maybe not today, but tomorrow. And it looks cool even if there's not any color. So there's also, you know, if you just have a gray sky and the clouds are moving quickly, then you still will get something really cool, especially if you have, talking about composition, right? If you have some kind of focus feature, if it's not necessarily an interesting sunset or sunrise, you can still focus on something that's neat, maybe a building, a lighthouse, anything like that, and get those clouds behind it moving in a very cool sort of way. So, you know, don't be afraid to try things. It's just for fun. I mess with the settings all the time and just kind of play with stuff all the time.
So if it's like very, very windy out and the clouds are moving really fast, does it make it more blur? I mean, does it blur it out more, or does it over? I mean, with your experience, I don't know. I just shoot sunsets.
Yeah, sure. So if the clouds are moving really fast and it's windy, two things to think about. One, if it's windy, it's probably impacting your camera steadiness too. So either have a really solid tripod, like have a weight on that tripod, or put it on the ground or somewhere where it's not going to shake, because even a little bit of shake with the live composite will affect it. And then clouds themselves, you just will not need as much time at all to do the exposure to get them to move across. So on a really windy day, I mean, I've had it where 10 or 15 seconds makes it be all the way across the whole 14mm field of view, right? So it's pretty crazy. In the comments, I don't use any infrared filters. I have a net neutral density filter, but I don't use it all that often unless it's really, really bright and I want to get. So in this particular case, these photos, the sun was either down or about to be down. Like you can see that bright area on the side. And so if you're trying to get colors when the sun is still above the horizon, the ND filter helps a lot for that.
Yeah. The nice thing too with the live composite is that you can see it all as it's building on the back of your screen or in your viewfinder. Or I've used the OI Share app to do it sometimes because I can just see it on my phone. But it's nice because you can see it building as it's happening and you know exactly when to stop it before your image gets to a point where you no longer think it's perfect. And I love your bench. I did that a couple years ago for the fireworks. I was using live composite to capture fireworks above a bridge, and I didn't have a tripod because we were just out walking around, and I had a bench, and people were walking by me like I was being weird because I'm like, no, stand away from the camera. It's doing something.
Yep.
So you just gotta use what you can find: a fence post, a bench, a bookshelf, whatever you can find.
Yeah, even if you have your tripod.
Yeah. I always have it. It's always in the trunk of my car, but then I like go out and do things and don't drag. I'm not going to drag a tripod with me everywhere. That's crazy.
Yeah.
So I want to just take a look quickly at your different times altogether, because that's very impressive. The 6 minutes is really dreamy, like very smooth. And
yeah.
And so what do you do for your editing?
Yeah, sure. So I like to let it run as long as I can, really, because it does get a lot of those really cool, like longer streaks, more little bit of color. So this is the other thing I wanted to say, right, is don't be afraid to edit either. I don't edit a lot. Mostly let's see, what am I doing? I usually bring down the highlights a little bit. So I'm doing it in Lightroom, just on my phone, usually on the Lightroom mobile. So I bring down the highlights a little bit. Sometimes I bring up the shadows a little bit, like, just a few little swipes over here. Sometimes I bring up contrast if I feel like it's blown out a little bit in one area. And sometimes I bring up saturation, but I don't really think I brought up saturation for any of these. These are all edited exactly with the same, like I just copied all the settings between these three so you could kind of see what was going on. But this gives you a good idea of, how much change is there between these different times. I also wanted to mention, so similar to what Alex was talking about with trying different things, if you have Olympus cameras, I have mimicked this idea with that handheld high resolution mode. So except I put it on something. And so you can get that sort of, it's more less pronounced brush strokes, but more like artsy, I guess, simple strokes with the clouds, right? It's still movement. You can tell that there's movement, which is really nice. And so you can play with those kinds of settings too. And then if you have, I don't have a camera that does live ND, but if you have a live ND camera, you could try that as well. If you don't want to use a filter, but you have that. You can't use live ND and live composite at the same time. That won't work because the processing can't keep up. But you could try it, or you could put on, if you don't have an Olympus camera, right, you can put on a filter and do a long exposure. You can also mimic this brushstroke idea with a time lapse. And so you can take a time lapse of however many photos you want, maybe one every few seconds. And then in Photoshop, you can stack them and get the same sort of brushstroke effect. But again, live composite just makes it way easier. No work, right? All you got to do is, these would be beautiful even without any sort of editing whatsoever.
And it's all done in camera, so you don't have to edit. It's great, right?
Absolutely.
That's awesome. Oh, so experiment with your settings. That was kind of what you just wrapped up with. I like that, trying new things with a feature that was made for pretty much star trails and long exposures, and you're using it to paint clouds and rocket ships, which I think is awesome.
Thanks.
It's so cool.
Thank you.
Well, we have gone super over time tonight, but that's okay because we still have everybody watching, and you guys are seriously always the real MVPs of the show, hanging out and staying with us. And so I just want to say thank you so much, Maria, and also to Ethan and Alex and Eric for joining us tonight, because I know this has been a long time and we've talked about a lot of stuff, and I just appreciate that you guys came out and shared your expertise and your thoughts and your tips and your beautiful photography with all of us. So thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate you inviting us.
Well, I will let you go. If you guys want to hang out, I'll be wrapping up this show and just saying goodbye to everyone. So you guys, all of you that are still here and hanging out with us, thank you so much. And thank you so much for putting up with all of our little tech slip-ups tonight, because you know what? They can't all be winners. Sometimes we have to make small mistakes, and that's okay. We're still here, and we will be back next month with another episode, and our Home with Olympus classes are back on our Sign Up Genius for our small Zoom classes. So if you're missing out on our Zoom classes, definitely head over there and check those out. And we just want to say thank you again for sticking with us. And it is our first full year at OMDS, OM System. We're just really excited about going through this new year ahead with all of you. So thank you so much for joining us tonight.